Daluan Ruozan? Wang Chong was inwardly shocked. It had been quite a few days since he had last seen the Yusang Great Minister. There was a saying that went, "Visitors do not come with good intentions, and those with good intentions do not visit." For Daluan Ruozan to walk out at this moment could not mean anything good. "Great Minister, don't come if you've only come to speak pleasantries." Wang Chong chose to speak first, his voice resounding through the surroundings. "Young Master, long time no see." Daluan Ruozan had a leisurely look on his face, beaming as he slowly waved his feather fan. Wang Chong felt his heart give a fierce thump as he saw the look on Daluan Ruozan's face. For someone to be so easygoing after the heavy casualties inflicted in this battle was definitely strange. "Great Minister is in a rather good mood," Wang Chong said emotionlessly. "Ha. Young Master also spent these last few days very peacefully." Daluan Ruozan was all smiles, his expression growing more and more relaxed. "I truly wish to hide nothing from you. Today, this minister has come to tell young Master one thing." "Oh!" A pensive look appeared on Wang Chong's face. "Great Minister is truly in a carefree and leisurely mood." "Haha, young Master, do not misunderstand. This minister actually quite admires young Master." The happiness on Daluan Ruozan's face grew increasingly evident, but the feather fan in his hand was waving ever more slowly. "Whether it's Lion City or this city of steel, young Master's foresight and talent truly leave a deep impression. I see that young Master came prepared, but this minister wishes to ask, has young Master prepared enough water?" With this final question, Daluan Ruozan put away his fan and grinned. "Bzzt." Wang Chong's pupils constricted as his complexion paled, and the distant Daluan Ruozan had already retreated, leaving behind only a sonorous laughter that echoed through the battlefield. On the summit, Wang Chong stood unmoving, a grim expression on his face. Gentle breezes caressed his body, all of them ice-cold. Old Eagle walked out from the rear and anxiously asked, "Young Master, what's wrong?" He discovered it. This was the only thought left in Wang Chong's mind. There was one massive flaw in Wang Chong's plan, and one that he could never fill no matter what he did: water. Rainfall was scarce in the southwest, and a torrential rain like the one from a few days ago was extremely rare. But the food and water of nearly 100,000 soldiers was a problem that had to be addressed. A water source was different from steel walls. Wang Chong could transport steel walls, but he couldn't transport a water source. And in order to deal with the Tibetans and Mengshi Zhao, Wang Chong had chosen this mountain as the site of the decisive battle. But this made it even more difficult for Wang Chong to obtain a source of water. He could not address this deficiency no matter what he did. Wang Chong had done his utmost to conceal this flaw, but in the end, Daluan Ruozan had still managed to realize it. Standing under the banner, Wang Chong suddenly ordered, "Call Sir Zhang Shouji over." "Young Master." Zhang Shouji arrived faster than he had expected, bowing to Wang Chong's back. Zhang Shouji's complexion was still pale, but his condition had still much improved after being forced into sleep. In addition, Wang Chong had given him pills that could strengthen his body and supplement his vitality, which had also proved useful. After a long period of silence, Wang Chong said, "Sir Zhang, how much water do we still have left? How much did Su Qichin prepare for us? And how long can the army last with it?" "Lady Su has already done her best to prepare for us a large number of water bags. But water is a very special thing and cannot be transported like armaments. In addition, we arrived here in advance and, as young Master ordered, dug out many water-storing pools on the summit. We managed to collect a good deal of water from that downpour. In addition, young Master had us arrive here in advance, and we managed to excavate a water source nearby prepared before the battle. Thus, our water situation is actually rather decent. In addition, we stole quite a few water bags from the Mengshi Zhao camp in the night raid. However, the amount of water consumed by 80 to 90,000 soldiers is no small sum. No matter how much water we could have stored up, it would still be a cup of water being used to put out a burning cart, utterly insufficient," Zhang Shouji explained. Only he and Wang Chong knew the water situation for this army of 90,000, with everyone else unaware. This was for the express purpose of avoiding a panic. Water was not like food. Although it seemed insignificant, one had to use water every day. One had to use it to make food and drink it every day, as did the horses. Without ample supplies of water, the army would encounter difficulties even more fatal than a lack of provisions. Crucially, by choosing this mountain as the site of the decisive battle, Wang Chong had foreordained that water would always be an innate and irreparable flaw. He could have one or the other, but not both. Dalawan Ruozhen had seized upon his lethal weakness. "Tell me how long we can endure," Wang Chong calmly said. "12 days, Zhang Shouji said. Wang Chong frowned and asked once more. "Just how long is it?" Zhang Shouji hesitated before gritting his teeth and finally speaking the truth. 10, no, at most 9 days. Old Eagle, Chun Shusun, and the guards and messengers on the summit all paled. A moment ago, when Dalawan Ruozhen had come to speak with Wang Chong, they had already realized that something was wrong. But only when they realized that they only had water for 9 days did all of them understand that the problem was far more severe than they had imagined. The atmosphere on the summit instantly became extremely oppressive. Yet the entire summit was quiet. Everyone kept their mouths shut, not daring to say too much. "So, in 9 days, they'll begin a large-scale attack?" Old Eagle worriedly said. "It won't be 9 days. In 5, at most 6 days, they'll begin their attack. Dalawan Ruozhen won't wait for us to run completely out of water to begin his attack," Wang Chong sternly said. Dalawan Ruozhen wouldn't wait that long, nor would Zheluofeng. In 5 days, the army would begin to feel the strain from the lack of water, and these changes would be clearly expressed through the state of the army. If they hadn't known about this beforehand, the army would have remained unaffected. But it was precisely because Dalawan Ruozhen knew this that he had sought a meeting with Wang Chong. And by the 6th day, the situation would have worsened, and the morale of his soldiers would clearly be wavering. The amount of water allowed to horses and soldiers would rapidly decrease, and everyone would be able to feel this. But Wang Chong would be forced into this course of action. Because the moment he altered his plan and continued to consume water on a large scale, Dalawan Ruozhen would alter his plans and wait for the 7th day. If he believed that Wang Chong would continue, then he would wait another. At the very most, given the normal rate at which the Annan Protectorate army consumed water, he wouldn't even have to wait until the 9th day. And the moment the army had no water, the only thing awaiting it would be death. "Young master, what if we begin water restrictions? We might be able to last for 12 days. Zhang Shouji ventured. "There's no need." Wang Chong immediately rejected the proposal. "If we alter the plan, morale will drop, and we won't even have to wait for day 5. Dalawan Ruozhen will immediately begin the assault. In addition, have you forgotten our objective here?" Old Eagle and Chun Shusun both shivered, immediately reacting. Wang Chong had once told them that a war had both a tactical and strategic side. Tactically, their goal was to resist the Mengshi Yusang army and delay them here. And strategically, the result of this war was not merely decided by the outcomes of 1 or 2 battles. In Wang Chong's view, there was still one more factor that could decide the Southwest War. The imperial court. "I wonder if Big Uncle or King Song have been able to do anything yet," Wang Chong quietly said to himself. The Great Tang truly was on the decline, the long peace having caused it to slowly lose its initial sharpness. The current Great Tang, Wang Chong was sure, was definitely now facing troubles on all sides. The Turks, Goguryeo, the Abbasid Caliphate, Charaxpazinu, and the kingdoms of the western regions, these were the Great Tang's past foes or potential foes, and they were all working with Mengshi Zhao and Yusang to hold down the Great Tang's armies. But the Great Tang was still the Great Tang, and the resources it had accumulated over the centuries were still there. Wang Chong was confident that as long as he could delay the Mengshi Yusang army for a period of time, the imperial court would eventually dispatch reinforcements. How is it? Outside the Tibetan commander tent, everyone had gathered for a meeting. Dalawan Ruozhen and Zheluofeng stood at the fore while Huashu Huaitsong and Duan Gechuan stood in the rear, and behind them were the other generals. Nearby, the mountain upon which the Great Tang was encamped loomed like a primordial beast, spanning their field of vision. But everyone's eyes followed Daluan Ruozen's gaze to the smoke rising from the summit. When the Great Tang army had its 3 meals each day, the commanders of both armies would promptly appear to observe the sight together. This had become one of the strange scenes in the Mengshi Yusang army. The number of cooking fires hasn't decreased at all. The Tang are still not implementing water restrictions, Fengjie said on the side. As a hostage of the Great Tang, he had lived in its capital for a time, so he had an understanding of all aspects of their culture, from the art of war to Confucian learning. Thus, he had also somewhat understood how to determine the number of cooking fires. This is a reflection of the wisdom of that son of the Wang clan, Daluan Ruozen sighed. Putting aside their opposing standpoints, Daluan Ruozen actually felt a deep admiration and praise for Wang Chong. This was certainly a powerful foe, and if he were allowed to completely mature, not even Daluan Ruozen knew just how far he would go. But it was precisely for this reason that Daluan Ruozen could not allow him to leave alive. The current Tang army has its doubts stirred by my words. If he begins to implement water restrictions now, he might be able to stretch his water for a little longer, but the army will definitely start to panic. And this will only grow more severe as time passes, resulting in an even worse outcome than if he didn't implement water restrictions. But will this way actually work? Fengjie asked in surprise. Of course it won't. Daluan Ruozen chortled. No matter what he does now, it's all useless. This is his lethal weakness. Not even if he were the smartest person in the world would he be able to do anything about it. Your Majesty, the moment you've waited for is coming. In at most 7 days, we can begin the general offensive. Zheluofeng roared with laughter. The second day and the third day passed, Daluan Ruozen and Zheluofeng spending every day watching. However, the number of cooking fires in the Annan Protectorate army remained the same. Yet the atmosphere was beginning to subtly change. Just when Zheluofeng and Daluan Ruozen believed that this would continue, the unexpected occurred on the 4th day. Flap flap, a massive pitch-black messenger bird landed in front of the Tibetan commander tent. News from the northeast. Daluan Ruozen glanced at the symbol on the bird's leg as he untied the message, a hint of confusion in his eyes. To the northeast of the Yusang Empire was naturally the Great Tang's Longxi. Wei Todrakonglo and Dusong Mangpoj were currently stationed there. The two of them engaged in fierce battle against Geshu Han's Big Dipper army. Wei Todrakonglo was perfectly capable of holding down Geshu Han. The Big Dipper army was definitely in a state where it could only defend, not counterattack. Daluan Ruozen didn't understand why he would be receiving any news from Wei Todrakonglo's side. With a hint of confusion, Daluan Ruozen unfurled the message. Buzz! Daluan Ruozen instantly paled. What's happened? Huashu Huaitsong walked up from behind. See for yourself. Daluan Ruozen passed the missive to him. The paper had a very short message. Great Tang war god Wang Zhongxi had left the capital and was on his way to Longxi. Huashu Huaitsong instantly paled. This is a problem, Huashu Huaitsong muttered to himself, an extremely grave look on his face. If there was one person that everyone in the Yusang Empire feared, including the Tsenpo, it would have to be the Great Tang war god Wang Zhongxi. In Yusang's wars against the Great Tang, in which Wang Zhongxi led the Tang armies, Yusang had almost always been dealt a heavy defeat and been forced to retreat. Even the king of generals Wei Todrakonglo had suffered a bitter defeat at Wang Zhongxi's hands. The Great Tang army led by Wang Zhongxi had even almost fought its way up to the plateau and occupied the royal capital. When the news came out that Wang Zhongxi had entered the palace to be the crown prince's junior guardian, the entirety of the Yusang Empire had celebrated, everyone exhaling a deep sigh of relief. To the Yusang Empire, the news that Wang Zhongxi was moving out was a veritable earthquake. We don't have much time left. The king of generals won't be able to last for long, Daluan Ruozen said with a grimace. There was one person in the Great Tang that Daluan Ruozen had no means of controlling, and that was Wang Zhongxi. This person's level completely surpassed Daluan Ruozen's abilities. Although Daluan Ruozen had no desire to boost another's morale while diminishing his own, impartially speaking, Wei Todrakonglo was no match for Wang Zhongxi. He had heard before that Wang Zhongxi had only entered the palace to be the crown prince's junior guardian because of some hidden disease. It was obvious now, however, that this had been erroneous information. This was an ill omen for Yusang. Wang Zhongxi will need 10 days at most to travel from the capital to Longxi. In other words, we only have 10 days to completely annihilate the Anan Protectorate army and pacify the southwest. It seems like we'll have to move our operation up, Huoshu Huizong solemnly intoned. Old Sure, do you still have water? Let me use your water bag. Behind a high steel wall, a veteran soldier of the Anan Protectorate army licked his dry lips and stretched his hand out to the veteran at his side. I've got nothing. The old soldier turned his water bag over, the last drop of water within falling into his mouth. See, I don't even have enough for myself. If you want to drink some water, wait a couple of hours for them to send more down from above. I remember that our water wasn't this limited before. A voice butted in from the side. Do you think what they're saying is true? Is the army really running out of water? The soldiers instantly fell silent, all of them looking at the soldier who had spoken. You're seeking death. What nonsense are you saying? A veteran kicked the guilty soldier onto the ground, but his eyes were fixed on the summit. Although he was doing his utmost to remain calm, even he felt an intense unease. All around him was silence. None of them noticed that an air of unease was spreading over the army. Young master, the situation isn't looking good, Old Eagle worriedly said as he peered down the mountain. What everyone had worried about the most was taking place. Their water was running out, forcing them to implement water rationing. This alone wouldn't have done anything, but Daluan Ruozen's words had changed everything. Even Old Eagle, ignorant in the art of war, could sense that the army's morale had begun to shift over the last few days. This was a very worrying sign. I know, Wang Chong indifferently said, his face devoid of emotion. What had happened had happened. Right now, he had to think about how to resolve this problem. Reporting. The enemy army is showing signs of activity. A messenger suddenly charged up to the summit and kneeled to the ground. Buzz. Everyone began to look down the mountain. The inactive Mengshi, Yusang army had suddenly begun to mobilize. Tens of thousands of soldiers surging in from all directions, dust roiling and banners flying as they came with a truly astonishing momentum. And those mountainous elephants standing out from the army were particularly frightening. Not good. Old Eagle instantly paled. The Tibetans are going to attack. Pass on my order. The entire army should stand ready. Wang Chong's cool voice was particularly clear in the chaos, and his order was completely passed down the mountain. Bong! With this heaven-shaking strike of a war drum, the army stretching from the summit of the mountain to the base became somber and stern. Clang, clang, clang. A clattering of metal could be heard from below. With the two commanders of the Mengshi Yusang army as the center, blazing and dazzling lights began to ripple out to spread over the entire army. Thousands of halos of all kinds began to fill the army's field of vision. This was an unprecedented large-scale operation of the united Mengshi Yusang army. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were about to attack together, their momentum like a heaven-reaching wave. This formed a stark contrast with the silent Tang ranks on the mountain. But even though the mountain was silent, the atmosphere was only growing more fraught with tension. Each Anan Protectorate army soldier was tightly grasping his weapon, an extremely grave expression on his face. Chong-er! On the summit, as Wang Chong solemnly observed the situation down below, a voice rang out at his ear. Father! With a start, Wang Chong immediately responded, subconsciously turning to that tall and mighty figure. By using a sound transmission ability, his father was perfectly capable of speaking to him with his back turned. In a little while, when the battle begins, leave Huoshu Huizong and Duan Gechuan to me and Protector General Shenyu. Don't move and don't approach. Opponents on this level are not people you can deal with, Wang Yan said, his voice infused with a few different meanings. From the moment they arrived at this mountain, Wang Yan and Shenyu Zhongtong had observed the battle like two bystanders, passing almost all their authority to Wang Chong. But this time, their demeanor had clearly changed. Your child understands. Wang Chong nodded, his heart extremely heavy. It was clear that even his father and Shen Yuzhongtong had felt that the situation had gone sour. There were no probes and no signs of contempt. Yu Sang and Meng Shizhao were prepared to utilize their full strength to exterminate them. And they had chosen the moment when the great Tang army was running short of water, its morale beginning to fall. Rumble. Dust stirred. While the Tang army stood ready for combat, to the southeast, southwest, east, west, north, in all directions around the mountain, one valiant figure began to appear after the other, all of them exuding a storm of energy. Old Eagle took a step forward and blurted out, "It's Long Kinba. No, there's also Fenjie, Duan Yangyen," Chen Shusun said. As they looked on, figure after figure began to appear at the base of the mountain. Long Kinba, Fenjie, Duan Yangyen, Siren Xianxiong, Tumi Sangza, and there were also the generals of Meng Shizhao, the fierce generals of Yusang. All of them were in high spirits as they emerged from the roiling dust, followed by tens of thousands of soldiers. All the generals of the Mengshi Yusang army had finally appeared, completely shrouding the great Tang army in an invisible energy. Although nothing had yet occurred, a massive pressure instantly began to descend. From the start of this battle, the Mengshi Yusang army had always only sent 1, 2, or 3 generals. Never had they engaged in a large-scale commitment of their generals until now. Long Kinba, Fenjie, Duan Yangyen, Siren Xiangxiong, Tumi Sangza. In the previous battles, these people on their own had been able to pose a large problem to the Great Tang. Now, all of them had appeared to participate in the general offensive together. Winds would portend a storm, and by now, even the slowest person would have been able to tell that a fierce battle would be taking place today. Rumble. In a roiling cloud of dust, a flood of steel approached the southern face of the mountain, with 2 exceptionally striking figures riding in front. "Young Master Wang, have you solved your water problem?" A hearty laugh came from the foot of the mountain. Daluan Ruozhen, seated on a Tibetan steed, raised his head to the summit, his face all smiles. If there was one thing he could tell, it was that the Tang morale was extremely poor. Wang Chong had used all sorts of methods to compel Daluan Ruozhen to an extremely rare state, but in the end, he had still allowed his weak point to be discovered. "Young master, don't speak with him." Even Old Eagle could sense that Daluan Ruozhen harbored no good intentions by requesting to speak with Wang Chong at this time. "It's fine." Wang Chong waved his hand. His originally focused expression actually broke into a smile at Daluan Ruozhen's words. "Great Minister, I knew that you would attack today. Let's make a bet. How many people do you think Yusang and Meng Shizhao will lose this time?" Wang Chong smiled as he walked up in front of the banner. On the first day, Yusang and Meng Shizhao lost nearly 100,000 people. "Great Minister, take a guess. Once this battle ends, how many more of your people will be killed? I wager that half of your army will die here. What about you?" As he spoke, he slowly extended a figure and coldly gestured out a large circle over the army gathered at the base. Buzz! The Tibetans did not react to these words, as they could not understand them, but the Meng Shizhao soldiers could. A restlessness moved through their army as all the soldiers paled, the atmosphere clearly taking a turn. Wang Chong's words might have been only a mere threat to other people, but to the Meng Shizhao it was a very real warning. Because amongst those nearly 100,000 soldiers that had died on the first day, 80% were Meng Shizhao soldiers. To these people, Wang Chong's words were not something as simple as a threat meant to scare. "Haha! Young master has a good tongue." Daluan Ruozhen waved his feather fan, but a nearly imperceptible glint flashed through his eyes. He had to admit that not even he could have imagined Wang Chong to use such a move. However, what use is it for young master to have a good tongue? Young master ended up being too clever for your own good. You intentionally chose this place to commence the final battle, but in the end, you were only digging your own grave. Great Minister, don't you feel that you are saying these words too early? Wang Chong's eyes froze for a moment, and then he gave a cold chuckle. Whose grave this is should wait until after the battle. Ha, it's fine as long young master still has some confidence. The rest of my words are not meant for you. Daluan Ruozhen turned his gaze toward another place. At this sight, Wang Chong only laughed. Wang Yan, Shenyu Zhongtong, this is the last chance. Surrender. Daluan Ruozhen's voice echoed through the battlefield. The battlefield was quiet for a moment. Finally, Wang Yan's voice rang out, concise and to the point, leaving no leeway. There's no need for great minister to waste your strength in vain. Begin the battle. Humph, as you wish. With a snort, Daluan Ruozhen turned his horse, riding off to the rear in a trail of dust. Begin! With this icy order, the rows of yak horns began to unleash their mournful blares into the sky. In this tense air filled with fierce gusts and roiling dust, the first assault was not that of the Tibetan or Mengshi Zhao cavalry, but a massive stone. Bang! 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 Stone after massive stone whistled as they hurtled through the air, leaving behind trails, before smashing into the mountain. Rumble! Dust stirred as the metal walls were dented or even smashed out of the ground by these boulders. Careful! Shrill shouts echoed across the mountain as the Anan Protectorate army attempted to avoid the boulders. Kai-il! As the massive boulders smashed down, the entire Mengshi Yusang army began to attack. Crash! Large metal shields began to appear within the dust, glimmering with a cold luster. The Whitestone Corps, which had lost 70% of its forces in that first engagement, had once more appeared. All their forces were invested in this assault, even the injured Duan Wuzong. His body was covered in bandages and his breathing was unsteady, but his eyes were exceptionally bright and energetic. All soldiers advance. Anyone who dares to retreat will be immediately executed. Anyone who kills 5 Tang soldiers will be awarded the rank of 100-man commander. Anyone who kills 10 Tang soldiers will be awarded the rank of 1,000-man commander and 10,000 taels of gold. Duan Wuzong's hoarse voice cut through the battlefield while the halos under his feet began to expand. Baea! To the southeast, the elephants angrily trumpeted as they followed close behind the Whitestone Corps, the Mengshi Zhao infantry protecting them as they charged. If one looked carefully, they would notice flashes of golden light from the metal covers around the ears of the elephants. In the battle several days ago, the White Elephants Corps had lost more than 200 elephants to the roars of Wang Chong's forces and several thousand soldiers to the berserk charges of the elephants. To deal with the Tang, the Mengshi Zhao army had crafted these exquisite metal covers to help the elephants defend against sonic attacks. All of this had been the idea of Daluan Ruozhen. And from the southwest, Mengshi Zhao soldiers equipped in armor of gold and white were charging forward. These soldiers were more powerful than the average soldiers in terms of both morale and cultivation, even on par with the soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army on the mountain. And their armor itself was of superb quality. Only Mengshi Zhao's Dragon Sun Corps, led by Crown Prince Fenjie, could be equipped with such excellent armor. This entire corps was made up of specially chosen elites, and a portion of it were members of Mengshi Zhao's royal guard. These soldiers were under the direct command of Zheluofeng. Even Fenjie had to obtain Zheluofeng's approval before using them. With the start of this battle, Zheluofeng had finally allowed Fenjie to command his most elite troops. All troops, hear my command. Until my order is received, no one is allowed to act rashly. Fenjie was fully equipped, and his eyes fixed on the summit were blazing with a fierce fighting intent. Come, Wang Chong. Today this will be where your bones are buried. Fenjie's heart blazed with the flames of war. Never had Fenjie so ardently hoped to destroy an opponent. This was not for the sake of the slain Jiasiluo, but for himself. In this battle, Wang Chong had outshone him far too much. If he could not surpass his opponent, the best method was to completely destroy him. The northeast, the northwest, the south, the north, Xiren Xianxiong, Longqinba, Duan Hengdao, and the rest of the Mengshi Zhao and Yusang generals began to attack. Tens of thousands of soldiers formed a vast and endless sea behind them, completely surrounding the mountain. Clang, clang, clang. Countless war halos began to spread out from the feet of these generals to the rest of the army. All generals, take up your positions and prepare to attack. On the summit, Wang Chong's voice remained cool and composed in the blustery winds. As his order was passed down the mountain, the generals of the Anan Protectorate army began to arrange themselves like chess pieces scattered over the mountain. If one looked down from the sky, they would discover that the disposition of the Tang generals was like that of the stars in the sky. The Myriad Stars formation was an extremely powerful formation from Wang Chong's last life. By connecting the generals in the army at various crucial places together, it could form a sturdy fortress. This method could allow the generals to display the most power and spread this power to the entire army. This formation had never appeared before in this era, and Wang Chong had not been given sufficient time to properly train these generals. However, this rough variation of the Myriad Stars formation was enough to push the fighting power of the army to a whole new level. Bang! 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 The dazzling halos like fierce flames began to cover the mountain. Only a few moments later, these two armies smashed against each other like mighty waves. Rumble! No one could have ever described the moment those armies clashed. The earth quaked and the mountain shuddered, causing many rocks to roll down its sides. Kai-il! Kai-il! The first wave was not led by the Whitestone Corps, but the White Elephant Corps. Baea! The army parted as an awry elephant 8 or 9 meters high, its ears flapping, moved its heavy feet like they were weightless and charged up the mountain slope. Bang! A metal wall weighing 6 or 7,000 jin was grabbed by the long elephant nose and flung down the slope as if it weighed nothing. Ding ding ding! Hook after hook flew out and latched onto a distant metal wall. Some Tibetan cavalry swiftly turned around and began to pull. Boom! The wall was felled amid flying dust, and the Mengshi Zhao soldiers who had been waiting for so long charged into the gap. And in the entire army, the sharpest of all was Long Kinba. Buzz! A scimitar shrilly cut through the air, leaving behind screams and severed limbs wherever it passed. Even a hardy metal wall had a piece cut out of it by that harsh scimitar. Long Kinba's abilities had reached an inconceivable level. Wherever he went, his surroundings were transformed into a living hell. Ha ha ha! This is all the so-called Great Tang amounts to. Long Kinba coldly snorted as he strode up the mountain. His steps were slow, but they were extremely steady, as if nothing in the world could stop him, until Long Kinba encountered that individual. Bang! A massive halberd landed on the mountain, this simple action seeming to carry with it an enormous power. Even Long Kinba had to raise an eyebrow. Long Kinba, we meet again. A low voice came from up the mountain. That person's hair flapped in the wind, and his face, which seemed to be chiseled from stone, was embedded with two eyes that seemed as deep as the sea. Sun Luiwe. Long Kinba's expression sank as he halted his steps. This person was dressed in an armor completely different from the rest of the Anan Protectorate army. It was simple and thick, with nothing special about it besides its weight. In truth, this person was not a member of the Anan Protectorate army. Wang Yen had several generals under his command different from regular generals. They had no rank or title, but their status in the army was above even Chen Shusun. Sun Luiwe was one of these generals. He was not only one of Wang Yan's personal guards, but also a retainer of the Wang clan. Back when Wang Yan entered the army, the patriarch of the Wang clan, Duke Zhou, had arranged for Sun Luiwe to be at Wang Yan's side. These people were all experts that had been selected from the best soldiers, and they rarely left Wang Yan's side. They were like his shadow. When Wang Yan was not present, they could substitute for him and oversee the entire army to deal with any sudden surprises. During the siege of Lion City, Long Kinba had been nigh unstoppable. Only Sun Luiwe had been able to check his brash assault. Annoying fool! Long Kinba's eyes narrowed as he instantly charged forward, scimitar swinging. The moment he charged forward, a light flashed, and a massive shadow that seemed like a demonic god appeared behind him. It's finally my turn. While the two armies were engaged in their bitter clash, a short yet valiant figure appeared at the back of the mountain. Tumi Xianxia looked up at that waterfall of caltrops descending from the summit, a strange smile appearing on his lips. Boom! With a thought, Tumi Xianxia suddenly stomped forward, and an invisible ripple spread out from his feet. The scene on the mountain slope suddenly changed. Hundreds of metal men stood up from the waterfall of caltrops and swiftly began to clean up their surroundings. Bang bang bang. These metal men picked up caltrop after caltrop and threw them down the mountain, working with incredible speed. Buzz. Xianxia looked around, his eyes quickly locking onto two nearby metal walls. His fingers spread apart as he began his summoning. Rise for me! Roar! The two metal walls began to twist and roar. Two metal giants rose up like prehistoric beasts and began to crawl up the mountain. With these two metal giants, the cleanup proceeded even more quickly. Once this path is cleared up, it will serve as the best place for the cavalry to charge up. Xianxia grimly laughed as he looked up the mountain. With both sides engaged in battle, now was the best opportunity to clean up the caltrops. The great minister's plan was not merely to defeat them in a head-on confrontation on the battlefield. Leaving the metal men to their task, Xianxia began to quickly make his way up the mountain. This was a battle of unprecedented scale. Purely in terms of military strength, it far surpassed any previous battle. The dense ranks of the Mengshi Yusang army crashed forward like giant waves. The 100,000 soldiers of the Whitestone Corps had once madly assailed this summit, but the number of soldiers this time was even greater than that. Each soldier of the Anan Protectorate army was under incredible pressure. The outermost soldiers might have been equipped with large shields, but these shields were trembling like drops of water, the fast and furious attacks almost causing their bones to shatter. Besides this, the Mengshi Yusang army were also clearing up the metal walls, slowly shrinking the space in which the Anan Protectorate army could operate. The situation was turning more and more against the Tang. It's about time. Wang Chong looked down from the summit at the battlefield. Although the Mengshi Yusang army was proceeding with a vicious momentum, everything was still under his control. Boom! Just when the Mengshi Yusang army was pressing closer and closer, Wang Chong's eyes flashed and he took a step forward. Boom! This step seemed to set the mountain shaking as an invisible energy began to spread down the sides of the mountain to cover the battlefield. Wang Chong had finally unleashed the strongest halo in his body, the bane of the battlefield. Buzz! Invisible ripples began to extinguish the halos of the Mengshi Yusang soldiers like so many candles, all of them greatly dimming. Buzz! In mere moments, the tens of thousands of Tibetan and Mengshi Zhao soldiers on the mountain suddenly had their cultivation drop an entire level. And right when Wang Chong unleashed the bane of the battlefield halo, attack! The defensive Anan Protectorate army chose to attack. Twang twang twang. Deafening booms filled the air. The first to strike was not the Tang infantry, but the great Tang ballistae. On flat terrain, it was basically impossible for ballistae to fire around the soldiers on the front lines. But their location on the mountain made this task much simpler. Boom boom boom. The dense quarters of the battlefield, with thousands of soldiers squeezed into one place, were the best place for the ballistae to gather their harvest. While the thick bolts covered in inscriptions were fired, at the front lines, a forest of pikes suddenly stabbed out from the chinks in the shield wall. Squelch, squelch, squelch. In the past, the strength of these pikes would have been limited, but all the Mengshi Yusang warriors were currently in a weakened state. The sharp pikes were able to plunge through their stellar energy barriers and into their bodies, raising them high into the air and flinging them away. The ish, the ish, the ish. In a few short moments, the forest of pikes had thrust out and in several times. They emerged from the shield wall shining bright and retracted painted in dark red. The ground in front of the shield wall was soon littered with corpses. These valiant Mengshi Yusang warriors who had been so formidable just moments before were now punctured as easily as cloth bags. In addition, while the shield soldiers had been under enormous pressure before, they now felt the severe weakening of the enemy attacks, allowing them to quickly harden up their lines. Axemen, move out! Suddenly, furious roars rose from the front lines as massive axes began to fly through the air, smashing into the sea of Mengshi Yusang soldiers. At this same moment, the earth quaked as stalwart figures suddenly charged out of the Tang ranks like ferocious beasts, slamming into the Mengshi Yusang ranks. Die for me! The muscular figures of the Tang axemen advanced through the enemy ranks with fierce expressions on their faces and veins bulging out of their skin. Their excellent and sturdy armor and the inscribed axes in their hands allowed them to easily hew through the enemy ranks. Aya! Screams filled the air as the Tibetan and Mengshi Zhao soldiers were cut down like stalks of wheat. A few Mengshi Zhao soldiers were even cleaved in two by the giant axes, their bodies falling both to the left and the right. Amongst all infantry, axemen had always been the strongest, and they were always selected from the cream of the crop. An axeman was always at true martial tier 6 at the minimum, and with the massive debuff inflicted on the enemy army by Wang Chong's Bane of the battlefield, these axemen proved even more effective. In an army, axemen had incredible offensive power, always used for a vigorous push to break the enemy formation when the situation was looking unfavorable. Boom, boom, boom. To the southeast, southwest, northwest. In every direction, the army that had once held the advantage began to crumble. None of the soldiers were able to put up any resistance. What's going on here? How could their strength change so quickly? What sort of power could have this large a range? The transformation on the battlefield had shocked everyone. This was not the first time Wang Chong had used the Bane of the battlefield halo, but this was the first time that it was on a battlefield of many tens of thousands, allowing it to produce never-before-seen results. Even a fool would be able to notice that the Bane of the battlefield was affecting the entire mountain and perhaps even beyond its boundaries. Great Minister, what do we do? People began to turn toward Daluan Ruozhen at the base of the mountain. There's no need to worry. Such a large halo must have extremely large costs. Pass on my order to continue the assault, Daluan Ruozhen pronounced with a wave of his hand. Although he didn't know how Wang Chong had managed it, in Daluan Ruozhen's view, there was only one thing in this world that could inflict such a large-scale debuff on the enemy army's halos, and that was another halo. But every halo required a consumption of energy. The more people it encompassed, the more energy it consumed. Given the massive range Wang Chong's halo covered, Daluan Ruozhen was confident that it would quickly sap the user of all his energy. More importantly, in this sort of battle, the strongest halo or the strongest existence could not achieve much against an army of hundreds of thousands. If Huashu Huizong alone could win a war, what did they need all the other soldiers for? But Daluan Ruozhen quickly realized that his judgment was wrong. Nay! As countless people looked on, a fierce cry arose from the summit. A divine steed with snow-white hooves appeared under the banner, a beanstalk in its mouth. And the erect figure on the back of this horse was like the sun in the sky, attracting everyone's gaze. At this moment, Wang Chong appeared like a handsome god looking down from the heavens. Buzz! The air trembled as a halo of thorns began to spread from under the feet of the white-hoofed shadow, pouring down from the summit like a flood to expand over the army. This strange halo of thorns began to buff the various shield soldiers, axemen, and archers, instantly raising the strength of the Annan Protectorate army. Even Daluan Ruozhen could tell that the Tang army had clearly become much stronger, exuding a brand new aura. One halo weakened the enemy soldiers while the other halo strengthened his own. Even Daluan Ruozhen couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock. What sort of halo is this? Daluan Ruozhen was mentally shocked by something else. For a normal halo to buff one of strength, dexterity, or speed was already decent enough, but Wang Chong could simultaneously buff all three. In these circumstances, in this terrain, the 80 to 90,000 soldiers of the Annan Protectorate army could defend the mountain so tightly that nothing would be able to make it through. Send an order to Duan Yangyan. Have him use his elephants to immediately shatter their formation. Daluan Ruozhen's eyes narrowed as he swiftly issued this order. Wang Chong had many secrets. In Daluan Ruozhen's experience, a halo that covered such a large area could only be possessed by a great general, but Wang Chong was clearly no great general. And besides that, this sort of halo that could simultaneously raise strength, dexterity, and speed was no ordinary technique. It would be extremely rare in any empire, and even the most illustrious Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple of Yusang did not have many such techniques. In addition, the division of giants that the Abbasid Caliphate helped us train should have arrived. It's their turn to move out. With these final words, Daluan Ruozhen's gaze turned extremely dark. Yusang and the Abbasid Caliphate had begun to work together very early on. In addition, Their collaboration was far from restricted to that black kerosene. The division of giants was one of the fruits of their alliance. Roar. A roar came from the distant horizon. Brutal, cruel, wild, and imbued with a desire to maim and massacre. It was so loud that it sounded like a peal of thunder, so loud that it even drowned the sounds of fighting and the blares of the elephants. The earth rumbled as if a great army was approaching from the distance. This turmoil attracted everyone's notice, including that of Wang Chong on the summit. This is... Wang Chong slightly narrowed his eyes, a hint of confusion appearing within them. The Great Tang had been fighting with Meng Shizhao and Yu Sang for some time, so each side had a general understanding of all the soldiers each side could put into play. But Wang Chong could guarantee that he had never felt this sort of energy before. Buzz. Upon clearly making out that thing appearing on the horizon, even Wang Chong had to widen his eyes. A group of giant figures had suddenly appeared on the horizon. The reason he thought of them as figures and not soldiers was that Wang Chong had never before seen humans with such massive bodies. The bodies of these creatures were all incredibly muscular, and even more astonishing was their height. All of them were 6 to 7 meters tall, 3 to 4 times taller than a normal person. Their skin was pitch black, their expressions vicious, contorted, and ugly, and the thick plate armor covering their bodies was itself dreadful to behold. However, there was no doubt that they were humans. Aya! Get out of the way! Hurry! Screams began to fill the air, not from the Tang soldiers, but from the distant Tibetan warriors. When these giants appeared, their wild and brutal aura made even the well-trained highland steeds whinny in fright. All of the Tibetans began to flee out of the path of these giants. As the giants approached, the Tibetans parted like waves, or like a flock urged on by a shepherd. Although these giants were wearing plate armor that must have weighed around 1,000 jin and were wielding crude maces, cudgels, spears, and shields, all of them were running at a speed that could outrun warhorses. What sort of monster is this? Chun Shusan's eyes were twitching in shock. Though he had fought with the Tibetans for more than a month, he had never seen a monster appear amongst the Tibetan ranks. These could not be humans, only human-shaped monsters. Although these monsters were still a distance away, the cruel and bloodthirsty aura that preceded them caused even Chun Shusan's heart to madly beat in fear. These soldiers had no place in a regular battle. They're from Sindhu. Although the monsters were still very far away, Wang Chong could tell at a glance from their pitch-black skin that they had once been part of the impoverished people of Sindhu. Connecting this fact to their massive constitutions caused a name to instantly emerge in Wang Chong's mind. The Skyquaking Army. Wang Chong muttered this name to himself. In all of human history, whether here or in any other parallel universe, blood vessels and skeletal structures restricted the average human to a height of 2 meters. It was extremely rare for someone with a height between 2.2 to 2.4 meters like the invincible Great General Li Sai to appear. But this did not mean that monsters who were even larger and taller than Li Sai did not exist. At least in the history that Wang Chong knew of, a very special army had existed for a short time. The Skyquaking Army. Wang Chong recalled that in the lands to the west, within the borders of the impoverished Sindhu, the Abbasid Caliphate and Yusang, which bordered Sindhu, worked together on a plan. They dispatched people into Sindhu to find young and orphan people of abnormal height. The Abbasid Caliphate and Yusang began to raise these people, feeding them all kinds of medicines and specially treated eagle, tiger, lion, and elephant meat. They had them cultivate an ancient technique from some waning religion while also constantly using special techniques to stimulate their acupuncture points, awakening their potential. In the end, they succeeded in raising massive beings possessing limitless strength, which they called the Skyquaking Army. It was rumored that each soldier of the Skyquaking Army was 7 or 8 meters tall, some of them even approaching 10 meters. And the Arabs were constantly using ancient and secret techniques to strengthen them. At the end, the soldiers of the Skyquaking Army were trained so that they could rely purely on their innate strength to fight against experts of the profound martial realm, even the imperial martial realm. It was like they had been trained through a system completely different from the martial arts system currently used by everyone else. Wang Chong had never seen the soldiers of the so-called Skyquaking Army, but he had heard many rumors about them. And in all the earth, everyone only treated the sky-quaking giants like a joke, a complete and utter joke. After all, people could not grow that tall. But Wang Chong was different. Many years after the Battle of Talas, he had gotten to know several soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army who had served under Gao Xianji and fled that battle. Based on what they said, when Gao Xianji battled with the Abbasid Caliphate, the soldiers of the Skyquaking Army had been amongst the ranks of the Abbasid Caliphate Army, and the soldiers of Anxi had even battled with them. But because Gao Xianji was already losing the battle at the time, the Skyquaking Army and Skyquaking giants raised by the Abbasid Caliphate had only appeared for a brief moment, and very few people knew of them. The soldier of the Anxi Protectorate that Wang Chong had met disappeared soon after their meeting. So Wang Chong had never been able to verify the rumor. Thus, Wang Chong couldn't provide any more information than this. But Wang Chong had never imagined that the Skyquaking Army would appear here. The Tibetans really are working with the Arabs, and they even collaborated on this Skyquaking Army plan. In addition, the prime conspirator working with the Arabs is actually Daluan Ruozhen. Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. Never had he imagined that he would meet the premature form of the Skyquaking giants here. They had appeared far earlier than their rumored first appearance. Daluan Ruozhen truly is like Zhel Yuofeng. Both are incredibly ambitious and both have been making plans for a long time. Even without Zhel Yuofeng, Daluan Ruozhen would still have sent out soldiers. This Skyquaking army is the reinforcements they had prepared on the plateau. In my last life, the Anan Protectorate army was wiped out at Arai, but things are completely different in this life. On the summit, Wang Chong continued to think. His interference had caused the Southwestern War to follow a completely different track from his last life. First, it was the sturdy Lion City by the Arai, leading to a month-long siege. After that was the steel fortress he had erected on this mountain. Yet another barrier that the Mengshi Yusang army would have to overcome and could not ignore. Events had developed far beyond their original trajectory. The Arabian kerosene had appeared, as had the Skyquaking army in its initial stages and the siege weapons. Not even Wang Chong was sure how the Southwestern War would progress. More importantly, Wang Chong knew why Daluan Ruozhen had dispatched this army, because both the elephants from the forests of Arai and the Skyquaking giants relied on their fleshly strength to fight. Wang Chong's bane of the battlefield halo was useless against the Arai elephants and Skyquaking giants. Baea! With a heaven-shaking blare, the first to strike was not the distant and dreadful figures of the Skyquaking giants, but the nearby Arai elephants with their extremely long tusks. Boom! 2 steel walls and the Tang soldiers behind them were flung into the air. 2 Arai elephants, 8 to 9 meters high and enclosed in white plate armor, led the charge up the mountain, accompanied by countless Tibetan and white elephant corps soldiers. In the distance, even more Arai elephants were trumpeting as they approached. Their trunks raised into the air as they stirred up large clouds of dust in their charge. Duan Yangyan had changed up his plans. This time, his white elephant corps had no intention of dragging away the metal walls. Its goal was to knock them down and open a path for the Mengshi Yusang army. The most terrifying thing about these Arai elephants was that they remained completely unaffected by the debuff effect of the bane of the battlefield. At this very moment, they had become the sharp tool utilized by the Mengshi Yusang army to break the Tang lines. Baea! 2 elephants shrilly blared as their giant feet slammed down on the Tang soldiers like descending mountains. Aya! Fear spread across the faces of all of the Anan Protectorate army soldiers, for their resistance was insignificant against the impervious and overpowering elephants. As that heavy foot crashed down, the Tang soldiers had no time to dodge, and even their armor crumpled with them as they were smashed into pulp. Baea! The elephant raised its trunk high as it rampaged unstoppably through the Tang ranks. Roar! Suddenly, a sonic attack struck. The massive energy contained within this voice jolted aside the metal covers, allowing the sound to explode in the elephant's mind. Right when the elephant raised its head in fright, a metal halberd flew through the air and pierced into the elephant's eye, embedding itself deep into its skull. The elephant's legs went soft as it crashed into the ground, blood gushing out from its punctured eye. Although they possessed a powerful vitality and enormous strength, beasts were not humans, and the intelligence of elephants was far beneath that of humans. Against human experts, it was still easily felled by a single strike. Axemen, cut down the guards on the elephants. The middle of the mountain was in chaos. A fully armored general bellowed this order, his eyes red with madness. The Anan Protectorate army had never been in such a perilous situation before. The lives of more than 80,000 soldiers were holding on by a single thread. If they could not stop this wave of attacks, the entire army would be wiped out. In order to stop this attack, all the generals invested all their energy. Kill the elephant guards. Bang bang. 2 soldiers of the White Elephant Corps, struck by whirling axes, dropped down from the head of an elephant. Soon after, 2 Tang soldiers as nimble as apes began to climb up the elephant's nose. Splush! 2 sharp swords stabbed into the eyes of the elephant. Seize them! Damn it! Don't let them escape! Sabers and spears madly stabbed down from the elephant's head at the Tang soldiers. But those Tang soldiers had already rolled back down the elephant's corpse and vanished. 5 days had been enough for Daluan Ruozhen and the Mengshi Yusang army to think of many ways to protect the elephants against the Tang attacks. But Wang Chong had also had ample time to think of methods to deal with the elephants. Killing the elephant guards was one of these methods. Rumble! In this fierce melee, dust suddenly began to rise from the southeast as a massive boom rang out. When the battle was at its most intense, the Mengshi Yusang forces in the southeast retreated without warning. All the Tang soldiers were caught by surprise, but in the intense melee, their bodies dragged them forward in pursuit. Interesting, they're learning from me. At the summit, Wang Chong's eyes lit up as he saw this, a smile appearing on his face. Daluan Ruozhen had actually taken the move he had used against the Mengshi Zhao army and used it against him, replaying this familiar scene before his eyes. Pass on my order. Transfer General Luo Ji to the southeast. Yes, your subordinate will go. A messenger quickly stood up and left to deliver this order. Daluan Ruozhen, if you want to use my methods to deal with me, you have to see who your opponent is. A sneer crept onto Wang Chong's lips. Daluan Ruozhen was truly formidable to have grasped this tactic in such a short time and to have successfully trained a group of soldiers in it. But his spear was still a far cry from breaking Wang Chong's shield. Luo Ji's troops were extremely skilled in offense. If they had the smallest chance, they would immediately bite down and refuse to let go. If the Mengshi Yusang army dared to intentionally reveal a flaw before him, they would only be ruining themselves. Wang Chong could tell at a glance that the level to which the Mengshi Yusang army had trained this tactic was definitely not enough to deal with a general of Luo Ji's caliber. It was like how a bag could cover a staff but couldn't cover a spear. Withdrawing his gaze from the southeast, Wang Chong turned his attention to the north, where an army dressed in armor of gold and white was currently charging up the mountain. Not even the elites of the Anan Protectorate army were capable of stopping it. The Dragon Sun Corps was the most elite corps of Mengshi Zhao. Under the command of Crown Prince Fenjie, it was displaying a most terrifying offensive power. Even without the assistance of the other armies or the protection of the White Elephant Corps, it had already succeeded in piercing more than halfway through the Anan Protectorate army's lines. Weapons, armor, strength, the Dragon Sun Corps occupied the highest place in Mengshi Zhao. In terms of pure strength, neither the Anan Protectorate army nor the Tibetan armored cavalry were a match for the Dragon Sun Corps. Even Wang Chong's Bane of the battlefield was much less effective against them, its debuff effects greatly limited. The Dragon Sun Corps was Mengshi Zhao's trump card. In the Battle of Irai, Zheluofeng had drawn the sharp sword to shatter the defensive lines of the Anan Protectorate army in a single blow and deal Shenyu Zhongtong a crushing defeat. In this mad assault of the Mengshi Yusang army, the greatest threat to the Tang did not come from Duan Yangyan's White Elephant Corps, but Fenjie's Dragon Sun Corps. To Wang Chong, the Dragon Sun Corps was the claw of the Mengshi Yusang army that he most desired to clip. Begin! Wang Chong turned his head to Lin Wuxiu. Your general will carry out the order. Lin Wuxiu gave a solemn bow before quickly leaving the summit. All soldiers, hear my order. Everyone only acts according to my orders. Those who disobey will be executed. A fierce blaze crackled in Fenjie's eyes, burning with an unprecedented fighting intent. His gaze seemed perpetually fixed on the summit, nothing else seeming to exist in his eyes except Wang Chong. Kill him, for Jiasiluo, and for myself. Fenjie's mind was in great turmoil. He was like an arrow fired from its bow, never stopping until it reached its target. The only thought in his mind was to kill Wang Chong. Crane wing formation. Advance at full speed. Fenjie unsheathed his sword, his entire body covered in blood as he strode over the corpses of Tang soldiers and continued to advance. Behind him, the armor on these corpses seemed to come to life, struggling free of their former owners and transforming into metal men. Clang, clang, clang. Fenjie stretched out a palm, and before any Tang soldiers could approach, the swords would be ripped out of their hands, the writhing of their armor causing them to fall screaming to the ground. Rumble. While Fenjie's Dragon Sun Corps was boldly advancing, the stampeding of hooves and countless screams came from behind it. Fenjie shivered as he turned around. A group of unknown cavalry had suddenly thrust into the side of his troops, cutting the Dragon Sun Corps in two. Great Tang cavalry! Fenjie's pupils constricted, his entire body trembling in rage. In all these days battling with the Great Tang, Fenjie had never seen their cavalry. This sudden strike from the Tang cavalry was like a needle stabbing into Fenjie's heart. Defensive retreat! His heart turning ice-cold, Fenjie let out the loudest order he had ever given in his life. An army divided in two had always been the most dangerous signal for any kind of soldier. If the Great Tang succeeded in this move, half of the Dragon Sun Corps would end up at the Great Tang's mercy. In that battle several days ago, Fenjie had personally witnessed what had happened to the 8,000 Tibetan cavalry that had ended up surrounded by the Great Tang. If he could not promptly break out, the Dragon Sun Corps would receive its greatest blow since its establishment. Boom! Nearly 100 metal men led the charge, after which the whole of the Dragon Sun Corps began a defensive retreat. Defensive retreat! Defensive retreat! Fenjie had bellowed with all his might, but his order had come too late. Cries of war filled the air as a unit of Tang axemen came charging over, a wave of giant flying axes preceding them. Axemen were the infantry with the most offensive power and were also the best kind of infantry for breaking defenses. Fenjie had never expected Wang Chong to bring these soldiers over to deal with him. Block them! Fenjie's eyes were wide in rage, a tension that he had never felt before gripping his body. But before his troops could even start working to stop the axemen, screams came from his front left ranks as a unit of shield soldiers came charging out. Kai-il! Their bellows shook the skies. The Anan Protectorate army, which had been slowly giving ground, suddenly reversed, soldiers charging in from all around, their weapons coldly gleaming. Not even Fenjie could tell just how many soldiers Wang Chong had prepared to kill him. Success! The elated cheer of a great Tang general came from the chaos behind Fenjie. Turning, he saw that the Anan Protectorate army had worked with the cavalry to strike a thunderous blow through the Dragon Sun Corps, successfully cutting off and encircling a part of it. Damn it! I've fallen for the trap. Fenjie was both furious and shocked, his vision seeming to go black. He had never imagined that Wang Chong would react so quickly and fiercely, leaving him no time to respond. That's what it means when they say that the hard is easy to break. Wang Chong only snorted as he watched his troops slowly retract around the Dragon Sun Corps, his attention quickly turning elsewhere. In the end, Fenjie was too young, and his understanding of the art of war was not even on the same level. If it were possible to unite the world solely through the strength of troops, shouldn't the Great Tang have already united the world? What need would it have for any military strategy? The fate of the Dragon Sun Corps was set. There were more important things that Wang Chong needed to deal with. Careful! All troops stand ready. Focus on defense. A nervous air hung over the base of the mountain, the Tang soldiers peering warily down the mountain. They gripped their weapons so tightly that the veins on their arms bulged out while cold sweat dripped from their brows. All of them could smell the thick scent of death. Roar! Ruthless and beast-like roars came from down below. The earth rumbled, and the pounding steps seemed to be treading on the hearts of the Tang soldiers. Careful! They're coming! Hold them! We can't let them break our defensive line. At the outermost edge of the front line, countless soldiers watched on as giant black silhouettes emerged out of the dust. Their hands were so tightly clenched that cold sweat was beginning to drip out. After all this time, the giants of the skyquaking army had finally arrived. Boom! A metal rod as thick as a thigh swept down, the massive energy within it sending 5 or 6 Tang soldiers flying. Before any other soldiers could come to fill the gap, a massive arm rested on the edge of a steel wall and pushed the weighty object away. Asalin ketafilu. Chier si lipa. A strange language emerged from the lips of the skyquaking giants as they charged up the mountain. Compared to their massive bodies, the soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army were insignificant ants. Bang! 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 The giants wreaked havoc on their formations, steel walls, and shield barriers, none of which were able to withstand even a single blow. Aya! The great Tang soldiers were sent flying here and there, none of them able to hold down the giants or even slow their steps slightly. Wherever the giants passed, the Tang were thrown into disarray. Old Eagle. As Wang Chong watched the skyquaking giants kill their way up the mountain, he suddenly spoke. Your subordinate understands. Without another word between them, Old Eagle unsheathed his Wuxia steel sword and looked behind him, his expression grave. Zhonglong Zhaohu, all of you follow me. Old Eagle mounted a horse and galloped down the mountain, the black dragon bandit elites close behind. The skyquaking giants were all equipped with thick and sturdy plate armor, forged through the collaboration of Yusang and the Abbasid Caliphate. In the entire army, the only weapons capable of cutting through this army were the Wuxia steel swords wielded by Wang Chong's subordinates. Nay! Old Eagle's warhorse charged down the mountain, colliding with a skyquaking giant charging up from below. The massive impact caused Old Eagle and his horse to be flung into the sky, but Old Eagle flipped in the air and slashed down at the giant with his Wuxia steel sword. Ow! A scream broke out of the giant's mouth, its mountainous figure staggering back down in retreat. Close by, an arm thicker than an adult's waist dropped to the ground, its stump gushing blood. Old Eagle dropped back down, half kneeling on the ground. As he looked at the severed arm, a smile crept onto his lips. For a moment all was silent. The bronze-colored eyes of all the giants around Old Eagle stared at him, or rather at his sword. For the first time they showed fear. This was the first time they had seen something in the hands of these weak and puny humans that could injure them. It seems like it's time for me to enter the field. At the base of the mountain, in the center of thousands of gazes, a tall and imposing figure smiled and suddenly began to stride forward. Boom! The earth quaked and dust plumed. The entire battlefield and the tens of thousands of soldiers fighting upon it all trembled at this single step, the earth seeming ready to sunder. This is... Sensing the frightening vibration behind him, Wang Chong narrowed his eyes, his heart beginning to madly thump. In the entire southwest, the number of people who possessed such a tyrannical aura could be counted on one hand. And in that direction, Wang Chong could only think of one person. Huashu Huaitsong. Wang Chong turning his head to the southwest and quickly spotted that figure, who seemed to be standing at the center of the world. Other than that roar that had interrupted the sound attacks on the Arai elephants, Huashu Huaitsong had not engaged in a single attack in this battle. He had not shown any sort of technique or skill until now. Boom! Merely by setting eyes on Huashu Huaitsong, Wang Chong could feel a massive wave of pressure assailing him, sweeping over him. Even from this distance, Wang Chong could feel that incredibly oppressive aura. It was like a blazing fire that could explode with terrifying power at any moment. BZZT. Though this was only a tiny bit of power, Wang Chong could clearly see a blue ray of energy soaring out from the top of Huashu Huaitsong's head. This energy, which seemed shapeless and yet physical at the same time, was a sharp sword that threw the black clouds above him into turmoil. So powerful! Wang Chong's eyes widened, his mind experiencing an unprecedented pressure. There were many legends about Huashu Huaitsong. Although there was no proof for many of these things, there was one thing that could be guaranteed. Huashu Huaitsong was an Yusang Great General, one of the most elite experts, a Saint Martial Realm expert. Although it was said in the Great Tang that Zhangqiu Jianxiong was definitely the strongest of the powerhouses of the southwest, Huashu Huizong was not far behind. Alas! Zhangqiu Jianxiong isn't here. Wang Chong's heart sank. His father's strength was definitely not enough to deal with Huashu Huizong, and Xinyu Zhongtong was also no match for Duan Gechuan. There was still a gap between these two and the individuals at the great general level. Right now, the only things allowing the Annan Protectorate army to contend with the Mengshi Yusang army were the Great Tang's numerous generals and the power of formations. This was the Great Tang's distinguishing feature in its foreign campaigns, and it was also the defensive measure the Great Tang used when confronting powerful foreign experts. A familiar voice rang out at his ear. "Chong-er, no matter what happens next, you can't get close. This is our fight with Huashu Huizong." Wang Yan's voice was calm and composed, imbued with a sort of understanding. Officials did not receive rewards and generals did not mind death. This was a principle that every general needed to grasp before embarking on a foreign campaign. Huashu Huizong was the strongest opponent Wang Yan had ever faced, and this was certainly not the first time the two had fought against each other. But no matter what, Wang Yan would never cower. The 80,000-some Great Tang soldiers would also not allow him to cower. "Father!" Wang Chong looked at his father's back, his mind in great agitation. His father had always given him a grim and harsh impression. He rarely smiled or showed any other emotion. This time, however, Wang Chong got a completely different feeling. "My strength is still too lacking. I have to find a way to increase it as quickly as possible. Father, be at ease. No matter what, I'll never let you fight alone." Wang Chong clenched his fists, his hair scattering and dancing in the wind. Starting from his reincarnation, his strength had been increasing very quickly, at a rate which no ordinary person could ever imagine. But in this level of battle, he was still far too weak. "I only have that method now." Wang Chong suddenly recalled the bane of generals that the Stone of Destiny had once mentioned. Regardless of Wang Chong's thoughts, the movements of Wang Yan and Huashu Huizong had attracted the notice of the entire battlefield. "Wang Yan, even now, do you still insist on putting up a desperate struggle?" A voice rang out over the mountain like a peal of thunder, resounding over the entire battlefield. Huashu Huizong looked at Wang Yan as well as the Great Tang generals ringed around him like the stars twinkling around the moon. Slowly, his lips formed into a smirk. Throughout the length of this war, no matter what tactics Wang Chong had used or how many losses he had inflicted, Huashu Huizong had never cared very much. Soldier against soldiers, general against general. Regardless of how the Central Plains regarded a war, Huashu Huizong had always believed that wars were always decided by a clash between the strongest powers on both sides. As long as he could defeat Wang Yan and Xinyu Zhongtong, the Annan Protectorate army would collapse without any further fight. "If Great General wishes to fight, Wang Yan will keep you company," Wang Yan indifferently said, his voice rumbling across the skies. Although it was nothing as domineering, it carried daring and persistence that would never break or move. Like a rock protruding out of a river, it would never fear any waves. Like the bamboo forests of the mountain, it would never snap under any storm. A look of surprise flickered through Huashu Huizong's eyes. "Wang Gangji is truly the descendant of ministers and generals. Just through this alone, you are worthy of being my opponent." Even the Yusang great general couldn't help but admire the demeanor and spirit displayed by Wang Yan. "Since this is the case, let us fight." Clang! Huashu Huizong unsheathed a long saber and strode forward. Dust roiled behind him and warhorses neighed as his elite guard and the cavalry under him, a force numbering more than 10,000, began to sweep toward the mountain with a dreadful and shocking momentum. After all this time, Huashu Huizong had finally mobilized his entire army. "Disperse!" A harsh order was issued from the summit, causing the army to instantly part. The 40,000 soldiers that the Great Tang had not committed for the entirety of this battle finally began to move. Bzzz. Several dozen spirited energies soared into the sky. A pitch-black horse, exuding the demeanor of a dragon, leaped down from the mountain. Wang Yan led the charge, surging toward Huashu Huizong, with countless elite generals of the Great Tang behind him. Huashu Huizong was an Yusang great general. No one in the southwest was any match for him, and no defensive line would be able to stop him. The steel walls that Wang Chong had erected on the mountain were mere decorations to a supreme expert like Huashu Huizong. Boom! As Wang Yan stepped down, several dozen Mengshi, Yusang soldiers blocking his way were suddenly sent flying away like ragdolls. Just like how the Tang soldiers could not stop Huashu Huizong, the Mengshi Yusang soldiers could not stop Wang Yan. Retreat! An order came from down below as Huashu Huizong led his countless Tibetan warriors up the mountain. In the middle of the mountain, the summit, the base, to the southeast, the southwest, thousands of eyes nervously watched as these two figures approached each other. The battle between Wang Yan and Huashu Huizong had attracted the attention of countless people. The Tibetan, Mengshi Zhao, and Great Tang generals were all watching, as if this fight that had yet to begin was even more important than their personal battles. Boom! Winds gusted as dust exploded, covering the earth. Deep within the dust, a Saiyan saber energy cut through the sky, 100 zhang tall as it tore through the air and hurtled toward Wang Yan's group. This saber energy left black fissures wherever it passed, even in the air. It was enough to make anyone pale. Whether it was Luo Ji or Chen Shusun, anyone in the Anan Protectorate army would be insignificant before this saber energy. No single general would be able to block such a blow. Buzz! Right when Huashu Huizong struck out with his saber, a transformation occurred on the mountain. Under countless stunned gazes, the halos of Wang Yan and the several dozen Tang generals behind him began to glimmer, then suddenly blazed to life. In the blink of an eye, all of them had fused together, manifesting in a massive golden-armored god standing tall on the mountain. The mighty miracle god! A thought flashed through Wang Chong's excited mind. The Great Tang possessed countless powerful formations that could gather the power of numerous generals, even the power of the entire army, and transform this power into an extremely powerful existence. The mighty miracle god formation was one of these formations, and it was the most powerful technique available to Wang Yan's army. Wang Chong had heard about it in his past, but he had never seen it. This was Wang Chong's first time seeing his father use the mighty miracle god formation. Boom! There was a heaven-shaking boom that sent the world quaking, the mountain trembling. As Wang Chong watched from the distance, he saw the shining golden figure of the mighty miracle god bring its palms together and block Huashu Huizong's terrifying saber. Immediately after blocking the saber, the mighty miracle god raised its massive right hand and punched at Huashu Huizong. Before the punch had even landed, the massive energy that preceded it had already forced away all the air in a radius of several hundred zhang. The earth seemed to groan in pain at this mighty energy, seeming ready to split apart at any time. Just when Huashu Huizong seemed about to die under the punch of the mighty miracle god, his body suddenly began to explode with golden light, and Buddhist mantras echoed across the heavens. Om, Ma, and I, Ti, Me, Hung One. As these strange incantations echoed through the heavens, a golden Buddha, 10 zhang tall, its body burning with red flames, stood up from where Huashu Huizong had been standing. Boom! The golden Buddha raised a palm, single-handedly blocking the punch of the 100 zhang tall mighty miracle god. Rumble! The earth shuddered and splintered as dirt and gravel rocketed into the air. The war horses nearby were thrown neighing into the air, where they were torn to pieces by the clash of stellar energy. This destructive energy made everyone who saw it shiver in fear. The Vairocana 2 Buddha Golden Body Mantra. Huashu Huizong finally used it. In a place that no one could see, Mengshi Zhao Great General Duanguchuan looked at that 10 zhang tall golden Buddha, a smile of anticipation on his face. The Vairocana Buddha Golden Body Mantra was one of the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple's greatest techniques. Only the great generals of Yusang were allowed to cultivate techniques of that level. Yusang had various great generals, and each one of them practiced a different supreme technique, while outsiders would never have a chance to even touch these techniques. This was also Duanguchuan's first time seeing this particular technique. The Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple's supreme techniques truly are formidable. Duanguchuan's gaze subconsciously turned to the other end of the mountain. The newly appointed Anan Protector General was standing there, a dense collection of generals surrounding him. In both armies, the only figures who had yet to move were him and Xianyu Zhongtong. The Anan Protectorate Army's Vajra God and Wang Yan's Mighty Miracle God were the two mountains standing before the Mengshi Yusang army. In their victory at Arai, Duan Gechuan had experienced Xianyu Zhongtong's Vajra God. The Vajra God was hailed as the strongest formation of the southwest. If Zhangzhou Jianxiong were the one using it, Duan Gechuan would definitely have to keep his distance, but Xianyu Zhongtong did not even have 70% of Zhangzhou Jianxiong's strength, so Duan Gechuan naturally had nothing to fear from him. He couldn't do much against Xianyu Zhongtong, but Xianyu Zhongtong couldn't do much against him. Thus, these two stood to the side while Wang Yan and Huashu Huizong battled it out. Boom! While Wang Yan was engaged in fierce combat with Huashu Huizong, the sounds of fighting erupted from elsewhere. Wang Chong quickly turned and noticed that a vast army was currently using this opportunity to charge up the mountain. Daluan Ruozhen. Wang Chong's eyes narrowed as his gaze immediately locked onto that familiar figure in the ranks, garbed in a blue robe and waving his feather fan. It was none other than Daluan Ruozhen. Only Daluan Ruozhen could possibly use the moment when everyone's attention was on Wang Yan and Huashu Huizong to launch an attack. His army of hundreds of thousands instantly began to exert a powerful pressure. There was no doubt now that this was the main thrust of Daluan Ruozhen's assault. The area where Wang Yan and Huashu Huizong were fighting was just bait. Wang Chong could smell danger in the air. All soldiers, hear my order. Assume positions. Archers, get ready. Wang Chong's voice resounded through the battlefield. Swoosh! With Wang Chong's order, the entire summit suddenly fell silent. All the soldiers and generals seemed to be fixed in place while a somber energy began to rise into the heavens. Wang Chong's myriad stars formation was slowly beginning to come to life. Although this was not its complete form, although this was only a rudimentary form, in Wang Chong's hands, this was enough power. Great Minister! At the base of the mountain, a rather aged Tibetan elder stood together with Daluan Ruozhen, a concerned look in his eyes. This was a tribal elder from the Tibetan plateau. When Yusang went to war, a few of their wise and farsighted elders would occasionally follow the army. The battles Wang Chong had directed had left a very deep impression on this elder, making him feel a great deal of apprehension toward that youth on the summit. We have no path of retreat. Wang Zhongxi is already headed toward Longxi. If the king of generals loses, Geshu Han will lead his army south, resulting in our total failure in this campaign. War requires sacrifice. No matter what, we must win this battle. Daluan Ruozhen stood at the base of the mountain, his eyes brimming with unprecedented determination. At this moment, he seemed not like a minister, but a valiant general. The Central Plains is awash with strategies and tactics that allow them to multiply the power of their attacks. Right now, we have many more soldiers than them, and this is currently our greatest advantage. No matter what tactic they use, as long as we can maintain this absolute advantage and continuously apply pressure, squeezing and constricting them, all their tactics and strategies will crumble. This is the most effective mechanism we have for destroying them. This, I understand. They both fell silent, but the army around them only redoubled their efforts, their killing intent causing space itself to warp. Boom! There was no hesitation as two mighty waves of soldiers smashed against each other on the slopes of the mountain, resulting in the most intense clash of the entire battle. Of the more than 400,000 soldiers, almost all of them had been committed, with Zheluofeng and Duan Gechuan holding back a single unit in reserve. This time, Daluan Ruozhen resorted to no tactics or strategy. It was a straightforward advance, one that relied on pure pressure. Once one's soldiers far outnumbered one's opponents, numbers became the best strategy, the best tactic. Kill! Kill! Bellows rang out through the sky. The roiling wave of black steel was enough to make anyone pale. Get ready! Get ready! Go! Wang Chong's voice resounded over the mountain. The first to attack was not the majestic Mengshi Yusang army but the Anan Protectorate army. Thwish thwish thwish. Countless arrows howled through the air, descending into the center of this flood of steel. Boom! It was like a boulder smashing into a river. The numerous arrows pierced through necks, cheeks, knees, and bodies. Hundreds upon thousands of Mengshi Zhao and Yusang soldiers began to fall, and a small hint of disorder immediately appeared in the Mengshi Yusang ranks. Thwish, thwish, thwish. 1 wave, 2 wave, 3 waves. Innumerable arrows continued to strike with lethal precision, causing the chaos to continuously expand. It's useless. Once the number of soldiers reaches a certain level, local victories are no longer a concern. Daluan Ruozhen looked at the mountain, his eyes calm. If a 100-man army lost 100 men in battle, the entire army would be wiped out. If a 200-man army lost 100 men in battle, it would be a severe wound. For a 1,000-man army, it would be a setback. But when this army swelled to several thousands, tens of thousands, the effect became triflingly small. The injuries inflicted by Wang Chong's archers were truly not critical to this army of hundreds of thousands. However, Daluan Ruozhen had still underestimated the objective of Wang Chong's plan. As the arrow volleys through the flood of black steel into chaos, a tiny flaw was revealed, upon which Wang Chong immediately triggered the myriad stars formation. The tens of thousands of Tang soldiers were like turbulent streams of water, intersecting, crashing, colliding, wrapping around the Mengshi Yusang soldiers like nooses. Congratulations to user for killing 3,412 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. Congratulations to user for killing 6,733 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. Congratulations to user for killing 9,188 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. Congratulations to user for killing 12340 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. In a few short moments, a string of messages gushed through Wang Chong's mind in a veritable waterfall. Meanwhile, countless halos were clashing and clattering below. Attack halos, strength halos, dexterity halos, power halos, defensive halos, charging halos, tens of thousands of war halos, all of them different, covered every inch of ground on the mountain. The ferocity of this battle had surpassed everyone's imaginations, even Wang Chong's. Wang Chong's myriad stars formation allowed his soldiers to become sharp nooses that cut the Mengshi Yusang army into pieces, encircling them so that they could be cut down. The soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army were hacked down like stalks of wheat, and the constant waterfall of messages in his mind clearly conveyed to Wang Chong the severity of their losses. Daluan Ruozhen had apparently already made the greatest decision he could make. He had determined to exchange a massive number of deaths for the ability to constantly shrink the area in which the Tang army could operate. Even though wave after wave of Mengshi Yusang soldiers was being felled, more continued to come up from the rear. This method was simple and cruel but rather effective. With this rather significant price, the Tang army was slowly being squeezed, and even Wang Chong was beginning to run out of space to maneuver. Against this bold and decisive enemy commander, who cared not for the sacrifice or price, even Wang Chong's strategies were no longer so easy to use or effective. Against this sort of opponent, even Wang Chong had to be awed. "Milord, we've paid a very heavy price." As he watched the soldiers continue to fall, the tribal elder found it very hard to keep his composure. From his place at the base of the mountain, he could clearly see red rivers of blood gushing down the slopes. The intensity of the battle had surpassed his expectations. The ground on the mountain was already saturated with blood, and in this state it was impossible to tell if this blood belonged to the Mengshi Yusang army or the Annan Protectorate army. "There's nothing to be done. This is the price that we must pay." Daluan Ruozhen slightly closed his eyes. He himself found it very hard to remain calm in the face of this gruesome battle. The Annan Protectorate army was putting up far more of a fight than he had expected. In his decades managing the Ngari royal lineage, not even Zhangqiu Zhenxiong could push him to this state. But all this was necessary, a price that had to be paid. Human wave tactics. This kind of great Tang truly makes one uneasy. If the great Tang has a few more talents like this, Yusang might never be able to compete. Daluan Ruozhen looked up at the summit, a vague anxiety hanging over his heart. In the course of the Southwest War, not even Daluan Ruozhen had realized that his original intent of exterminating the 80,000-some soldiers of the Annan Protectorate army had become the intent to eliminate that Wang Chong who had seemingly appeared out of thin air. Deep within Daluan Ruozen's heart, eradicating Wang Chong was now even more urgent than eliminating the Anan Protectorate army. But Daluan Ruozen could not allow a single shred of his intentions to be leaked. Wang Chong was far more vigilant than anyone could imagine. Without even considering the vast sea of soldiers that surrounded him, Wang Chong was liable to run the moment things began to look just slightly off. After witnessing Wang Chong disguising his soldiers as Tibetans to attack Meng Shizhao and as Meng Shizhao soldiers to attack the Tibetans, Daluan Ruozen surprisingly had no confidence in his ability to hold Wang Chong down. Rumble. The battle continued. To the south, the massive mighty miracle god was engaged in a hurricane of a battle with the Vairocana Buddha. The golden circular halo of a Buddha, akin to a shining sun, had appeared behind the Vairocana Buddha's head, and behind, the faint image of a massive snowy mountain could be seen. This was a sign that a supreme technique of the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple was being exhibited to its limits. Buzz. Stellar energy was converging from all around, gathering in that halo and in the image of the snowy mountain. Although the Yusang Empire did not have supreme battle formations on the level of the mighty miracle god formation, it still possessed many supreme arts and devices that could harness the strength of its soldiers, though their level was greatly lacking when compared to the mighty miracle god formation. Nay! Behind Huashu Huaitsong, the highland steeds were whinnying as they fell to the ground, the ever-valiant Tibetan soldiers beginning to dispiritedly drop to the ground as if all the energy had been drained from them. And across from Huashu Huaitsong, the Anan Protectorate army was faring little better. Clang clang clang. Though their halos were still resounding, the Tang soldiers had clearly become a little weaker. The mighty miracle god formation could not only absorb the energy of other generals, but that of ordinary soldiers as well. This was also the reason Wang Yan and Shenyu Zhongtong could use their formations to resist Huashu Huaitsong and Duan Gechuan. The battle in the south had fallen into a stalemate, while on the other side, the battle between Wang Chong and Daluan Ruozen had reached a white-hot intensity. Warning! 1280 soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army have died. Warning! 2314 soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army have died. Warning! 3215 soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army have died. Warning! 3847 soldiers of the Anan Protectorate army have died. The ringing messages in Wang Chong's mind, the endless warnings from the Stone of Destiny, let Wang Chong know that Daluan Ruozen's plan was finally beginning to show its effects. Wang Chong's Anan Protectorate army began to suffer a large number of casualties. This was a contest of wills. Strategy and tactics were useless here. Daluan Ruozen was endlessly hurling soldiers into the breach, the Mengshi Yusang army surging up the mountain, never stopping no matter how great a resistance they encountered. No matter how many soldiers they lost, more soldiers would always be there to take the place of the fallen. And the 40,000 soldiers Wang Chong commanded showed another face. Cool, callous, a rock standing against the frenzied waves. No matter how many Mengshi Yusang soldiers pushed forward, they would never retreat. Both Wang Chong's and Daluan Ruozen's armies were suffering massive casualties. Cavalry, mount your horses! At the climax of the battle, Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he suddenly mounted the white-hoofed shadow. A chorus of neighs came from behind him as one great Tang horseman after another arrived on the summit. Clang! Without hesitation, Wang Chong pulled out his Wu's steel sword. Lin Wuxiu, I leave command of the army to you. Nay! The white-hoofed shadow let out a loud cry as it led more than 2,000 great Tang cavalry charging down the mountain like a bolt of lightning. With this, the great Tang had used all its reserves. Rumble! No person could describe the impact Wang Chong's 2,000 cavalry had on the Mengshi Yusang army. Wang Chong had chosen to strike at the place where the Mengshi Yusang army had the fewest troops, where it was weakest. The halo of Dusk Stallion allowed Wang Chong's cavalry charge down the mountain to become the sharpest knife, stabbing through the entire Mengshi Yusang army in a single blow. Rumble! Under countless eyes, the entire mountainside was thrown into chaos. Wang Chong's myriad stars formation had already been putting on more and more pressure, and Wang Chong's 2,000 cavalry were the straw that broke the camel's back. Ah! Screams filled the air as the Mengshi Yusang army fell into disarray. Wang Chong's myriad stars formation used their momentum to advance, quickly hewing down the Tibetan and Mengshi Zhao soldiers. Congratulations to user for killing 78,615 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. Congratulations to user for killing 86,135 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. Congratulations to user for killing 91,543 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. Congratulations to user for killing 98,712 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army. A string of messages exploded through Wang Chong's mind, and when these voices reached their peak, Wang Chong received a surprising message. Congratulations to user for killing more than 200,000 foreign soldiers. You have fulfilled the upgrade conditions. The bane of the battlefield halo has advanced to the 3rd level. The entire world seemed to fall quiet for a moment, time seeming to slow to a crawl. Buzz. Wang Chong could feel a massive energy suddenly explode out of his body and expand to the horizon. No one could describe the effects of the transformation. In this fierce battlefield, this silent ripple instantly caused more than half of the tens of thousands of war halos to suddenly dim like candles being snuffed out. Some of the Mengshi Yusang soldiers who had suffered severe injuries even dropped below the true martial realm upon feeling the effects of the upgraded bane of the battlefield. The fuck? What's going on here? The faces of the Mengshi Yusang soldiers contorted in shock, as if they had seen a ghost. The difference between the true martial realm and the origin energy realm was a massive one, like a muscular man who could lift boulders suddenly becoming a small child who couldn't even truss a chicken. When the bane of the battlefield reached the 3rd level, its effect was so great that even a few generals appeared surprised. They were most sensitive to the changes in their surroundings. Damn it! It's that bastard brat again. Eyes began to look toward the summit, and even Zheluofeng couldn't help but twitch. Wang Chong's existence was already the greatest variable in the Southwestern War. His effect was no longer that of 1 or 2 soldiers or a general. He was already someone who could influence the outcome of this entire war. How could a halo like this exist in the world? How have I never heard of it? For a moment, Zheluofeng, Duan Gechuan, and Daluan Ruozhen shared the same thought. But no matter what they thought, Wang Chong's bane of the battlefield halo advancing to the 3rd level was like an avalanche dropping on their soldiers. The entire Mengshi Yusang army was in chaos, and the effects of the halo were even affecting the Tibetan soldiers behind Huashu Huizong. Huashu Huizong had been using a secret technique of the Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple this entire time to absorb the energy of his soldiers. When Wang Chong's bane of the battlefield halo attached to these soldiers and weakened them, even Huashu Huizong was affected. For a moment, he fell into a slight disadvantage against Wang Yan's mighty miracle god. Damn it! Huashu Huizong slightly paled. Never had he imagined that Wang Chong's halo could have an effect on him. In a battle of supreme experts like this, such a thing could be lethal. Kill! The thousands of Tang soldiers used this chance to charge down the mountain, and the Tibetan and Mengshi Zhao soldiers were falling apart. Just when it seemed like the Mengshi Yusang army would be completely routed, an earth-shaking boom came from the summit. The disturbance it created was so huge that the mountain itself trembled for a few moments, and dust roiled over the summit. Wang Chong was killing his way through enemy soldiers, but when he heard that sound, he paled and immediately turned the white-hoofed shadow around. Not good. That direction. Vaguely, he understood what must have happened. The summit was crowded with soldiers of the Annan Protectorate Army, so nothing should have happened there. But this direction was clearly, "Young master, it's bad. The Tibetans sent people to destroy our water." It took mere moments for a horseman to charge down from the mountain, the guard atop it not even bringing the horse to a stop before dismounting and kneeling before Wang Chong's horse. What? Like he had been struck by a bolt of lightning, Wang Chong swayed. For a moment, he felt like his entire body had been plunged into ice-cold water. Daluan Ruozhen. Wang Chong's gaze immediately turned to where Daluan Ruozhen was located. I fell for a trap. This was the only thought left in Wang Chong's mind, and as if to confirm his speculations, The resounding blare of the yak horn announcing a retreat suddenly came from within the camp at the base of the mountain. Daluan Ruozhen had finally chosen to sound the retreat. "Take me over to see." Wang Chong didn't have time to think, as he quickly turned his horse around and followed that guard back up the mountain. The Annan Protectorate army was continuing to pursue the enemies back north, but Wang Chong's attention was focused elsewhere. "Young master, take a look." At the back of the summit, a cave had completely collapsed, and water gushed down the slopes in a waterfall. The Tibetans used a massive boulder to reach here. Then they collapsed the cave, dug out the water we had stored inside and poisoned it, the pale-faced guard reported. Wang Chong turned his head to the nearby boulder the guard spoke of. "You said that they sat on this boulder and dropped down from the sky to reach this place?" "Yes, young master." Wang Chong instantly fell quiet. Sitting on a boulder like this and descending from the sky was an utterly absurd idea, and even if they did manage to land in one piece, they would still end up with severe injuries. Suicide soldiers. A thought occurred to Wang Chong. He was forced to admit that he would have never suspected Daluan Ruozhen to use this method to transport soldiers. There was no doubt that these soldiers had prepared themselves to never come back and to die on the summit. With this thought in mind, Wang Chong swept his gaze over the surroundings. As expected, he spotted several corpses. "We have people all around the summit, and we had already begun to move when we discovered these people. But we were still too late," the guard shamefully said. "We have 17 places in total on the mountain where we were storing water. How many have been poisoned?" 8. Wang Chong's expression darkened, his heart sinking. He now completely understood Daluan Ruozhen's plan. A proper battle had never been his goal, and even Huashu Huizong's attack had only been bait. His true goal had been the water stores on the summit. For his great undertaking, he had treated hundreds of thousands of soldiers as chess pieces. Wang Chong had to admit that he had underestimated the resolve of this Yusang great minister, as well as his trickery and daring. "It's because I've been underestimating him all this time." It's no wonder a civil minister was able to sit on the same level as figures of the southwest like Zhangqiu Jianxiong, Zheluofeng, and Huashu Huizong. Zhangqiu Jianxiong had a burning ambition and had always wanted to achieve something in the southwest. But after 10 years, he had accomplished nothing. So this is what was going on. Zhangqiu Jianxiong had always been hailed as the tiger of the empire, but both the great clans and the nobles of the capital had always spoken of him with veiled criticism. This was because he had never been able to turn this reputation into results. Wang Chong had also once had this misunderstanding, but now he understood Zhangqiu Jianxiong's circumstances. Daluan Ruozhen was not the type of person that would immediately put someone on guard. Not only that, the first impression of the majority of people would be just SOSO or an undeserved reputation, and they would treat him with contempt. But Daluan Ruozhen's true strike would always be like right now, lethal and catching one completely by surprise. "Water! Ah, water!" Wang Chong suddenly raised his head and gave a long sigh. Daluan Ruozhen had given him a truly difficult problem, and at this moment, Wang Chong was left with no other choice. The Tibetan and Mengshi Zhao soldiers had completely withdrawn at this point, leaving behind only a mountain covered in corpses. "How is it?" Daluan Ruozhen said with concern. Although he had fulfilled his objective, Daluan Ruozhen was still not one bit happy. Yusang and Mengshi Zhao combined had gathered an army of nearly 500,000 soldiers, and they had imperial great generals like Huashu Huizong and Duan Guchuan at command, as well as the assistance of Zheluofeng and the entire kingdom of Mengshi Zhao working the logistics network. Yet, in the end, they had still reached this point where they had to rely on their advantage in numbers. Daluan Ruozhen truly found this difficult to imagine. Wang Chong, relying on his weaker army, had already pushed this Ngari great minister famous throughout the Tibetan plateau to desperate straits. 123,400 people. The messenger intoned a number. Buzz. Even though he had already mentally prepared himself, Daluan Ruozhen still couldn't stop his heart from sinking upon hearing this number. The more than 400,000 soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army had actually suffered casualties of 120,000 soldiers. They had lost more than a quarter of their manpower. This was simply impossible to bear. This number greatly exceeded Daluan Ruozen's bottom line. How could it be this many? Is this number accurate? Daluan Ruozen said with a grimace. The messenger lowered his head and said, "Reporting to Great Minister, we have already taken the count 5 times. How many did the Great Tang lose? It is not possible to make an accurate count, but our estimate is that their deaths range between 23,000 and 24,000. Daluan Ruozen closed his eyes, not speaking for a very long time. Pass down my order to have the entire army reorganize. In addition, pass on my order to have Great General Huashu Huizong accompany me in meeting the Great Tang commander. Young master, look. There's something going on down there." On the summit, Old Eagle quickly noticed activity and pointed down the mountain. Wang Chong's brow creased as he suddenly stood up. The battle just finished. What does he want now? "Young Master Wang, can you come out for a chat?" A resounding voice echoed over the mountain. Looking down from the summit, one could see the Mengshi Yusang army part, and the figures of Daluan Ruozen and Huashu Huizong appear once more. But unlike the first time, Daluan Ruozen and Huashu Huizong no longer seemed as easygoing and unruffled. They seemed much more solemn and respectful. "We've already reached this state. What scheme is Great Minister planning now?" Wang Chong circulated the energy in his dantian, his eyes shining as he fearlessly looked down the mountain. Young Master has become much more serious. In front of Young Master, what has Ruozen done that deserves to be called a scheme? Daluan Ruozen earnestly said. Young Master has already seen the result of this battle. The water supply of the Anan Protectorate Army won't be able to last 3 days. For the sake of Yusang, and for the sake of Young Master and the Anan Protectorate Army, Daluan Ruozen wishes to earnestly discuss an issue with Young Master. Just what does this Daluan Ruozen want to do? At this moment, even Wang Yan and Shenyu Zhongtong, who were getting their wounds treated, couldn't help but look at each other and frown. They had fought with the Mengshi Yusang army for more than a month, but Daluan Ruozen's attitude had always been aggressive and unrelenting. This sort of humble and self-effacing attitude was something they had never seen from Daluan Ruozen. There's no need for Great Minister to worry about the matter of water. If Great Minister has anything he wishes to say, he should just state it frankly, Wang Chong calmly said. Young Master Wang, it is still those same words. If the Anan Protectorate Army and Young Master can surrender, I can guarantee that Young Master and all the soldiers of the Anan Protectorate Army will be treated appropriately. Although we cannot allow Young Master or the soldiers of the Anan Protectorate Army to return to the Great Tang, Young Master and all the soldiers can safely reside on the Tibetan Plateau. No one will be harmed. This is the best result for both Young Master and our Yusang. I hope that Young Master can earnestly consider this proposition. In this way, we can avoid any further senseless sacrifice. With these final words, Daluan Ruozen put down his feather fan, his gaze reflecting utter sincerity as he looked up at Wang Chong. The entire battlefield was absolutely silent. Zheluofeng, Duan Gechuan and Huashu Huizong, these powerhouses of the south who should have strenuously opposed this proposal, had all chosen to remain silent. The strong would only respect the strong. At this stage of the war, the casualties of the Mengshi Yusang army had even surpassed the Anan Protectorate armies. None of these powerhouses of the southwest had ever imagined such a thing. The summit was quiet, everyone waiting for Wang Chong's answer. Chong, choose what you feel is right. Young Master Chong, there's no need to fear. You are currently the highest commander of the entire Anan Protectorate Army. Whether it's war or peace, Young Master can choose whatever he pleases. Wang Yan's and Shenyu Zhongtong's voices rang out in Wang Chong's ears. They did not speak too much, but the two had used their actions to amply display their support for Wang Chong. Ha ha! Wang Chong smiled in the gentle breeze. He raised his head and thought to himself, is this a difficult choice? The Southwest War had already reached the point where there would be no rest without death. There was no path of retreat, no choice. The Great Tang could not lose, the Anan Protectorate Army could not lose, and he, Wang Chong, could certainly not lose. And did Daluan Ruozen really think that his victory was certain? Great Minister, have you heard of this saying? Wang Chong chuckled as he looked down the mountain. What? Daluan Ruozen's eyes narrowed. That Wang Chong could still laugh and chat about other things had truly caught him by surprise. He who laughs last, laughs best. Daluan Ruozen, Zheluo Feng, and Huoshu Huizong were all dumbfounded. Zheluo Feng had a deep understanding of the Great Tang, but he had never heard such a phrase before. Zheluo Feng turned to the bandaged figure of Fengjie and asked in confusion, Jai, you studied in the Great Tang for many years. Have you ever heard anyone say something like this? This? Your child has never heard of such a thing. Fengjie lowered his head. Everyone had been completely confused by Wang Chong. Ha ha ha, great minister. This war has still not reached its final moment. It's still far too early to determine who will win the prize. Wang Chong roared with laughter. Not waiting for Daluan Ruozen to ask any more questions, he left with a flick of his sleeve. At the base of the mountain, the commanders of the Mengshi Yusang army looked at each other in confusion, unable to speak.